All right, so here are 7 things that I did to fix my anxiety. This is definitely not an exhaustive list, but here are 7 big things that once I shifted this, it was able to help me tremendously. So let me just first paint a picture of how anxious that I was. I was anxious for so long that I could tell you the very few instances in like a 15-year period that I felt a little less anxious. One time I was at welding school and I was doing a welding project, and for the first time I wasn't obsessing over negative things, and I think that's part of what brought the results. Another time I was working for Pizza Hut, and my manager asked me to hold the pizza sign on the sidewalk that had all the specials on it, and I decided that I was going to dance. I don't know what I was thinking, but I was at my mom's house and I had this piece of cardboard and I was like practicing. I was listening to rock and roll music and I was practicing moving around and acting like it was a guitar, this piece of cardboard, as if it were the pizza sign. And I remember I felt better afterwards. And I can name you probably a couple other times as well. Oh, yeah. Whenever I used to take hot baths, that was one of the only other times that I would feel calm. But feeling calm was a rare occasion, or I should really say feeling calmer, because I technically wasn't totally calm. But anxiety was all that I knew. It was so bad that I remember growing up in church, I would shake hands with the elderly people, and they would always be like, "Oh my goodness, why are your hands so cold, young man?" And I was like, "I don't know. I just thought it was a part of who I was." And also, I had a lot of stomach issues, and my stomach would just growl all the time. It would, if you've ever seen the movie Finding Nemo, where Dory's trying to, speak orca-ish or whatever, she's like, and it was audibly loud. Like my stomach was just always having issues. I had eye floaters that I would just sit and watch, and I'd be like, "What the heck is that?" I didn't know what an eye floater was, and just the list of symptoms is very, very long, but it's all that I knew. And to me, there was no separation between these symptoms and who I was, because I didn't know that they were coming from anxiety. And so whenever I started to get rid of my anxiety, it was only then that I had this contrast where I could then see, wait a second, that wasn't normal. Me showing up to work every day and assuming that I was going to get fired, even though I was one of the better people at this job that I worked at. It was this call center. I remember one time in particular, my catastrophic, anxious mind was telling me that I was going to get fired, and I was terrified to check my email every day because I was waiting for that email to come through. "Jordan, we got to let you go." And it was actually an email saying that I'd won like this VIP award, and I had like some of the top numbers in my program or whatever. And I remember in that moment, I'm like, dude, I literally am constantly worried that I'm going to get fired, but yet the numbers don't reflect that. And just assume the worst about everything. I was always living in my head. I was never present, became addicted to video games and was always thinking about existence and obsessing over existence. I know now that that was a way to keep me in my head, not having to face my body. Had severe health anxiety, which I think also was a way for me to stay in my head, not have to be in my body. I'm just trying to tell you, this was all that I knew. Okay. This wasn't some mild case. This was a very severe case that started about kindergarten and continued to just get worse and worse as I got older. So for me to be completely anxiety free now is very, very profound. And it would be one thing if these things were effective for just me, because then it could just be, not really that relevant for everybody else. But I've spent the last 6 years helping anxiety sufferers and trauma sufferers, and these things are very, very potent. So I know some of you are like, okay, enough with the intro, so let's get right to it. I just wanted to paint that picture. So number one, I stopped avoiding situations that induced my anxiety, and I replaced that with exposure coupled with relaxation. So whenever you have a painful experience, either physically painful or emotionally distressing, your brain creates what's called a sensory trigger. Your brain basically takes a snapshot of all the sensory data around you that you're experiencing and files it in the filing cabinets of your brain as being associated with a threat. And that's because the brain registers emotional distress and physical pain as the same thing. And so even if it's just a lot of emotional distress, your brain registers that sensory data around you as if it's dangerous, right? So there's something called neuroplasticity. Our brain is like a ball of clay. It's like a ball of plastic. It's moldable either towards perceiving safety or perceiving threat. And so what ends up happening is you have all these painful experiences, let's say usually just emotionally distressing experiences, and your brain forms this association. And then the next time that you experience similar sensory data, your nervous system starts to go into fight or flight response. Stress hormones like cortisol, adrenaline are increasing, muscles tighten up, breathing rate is elevated, heart rate is elevated. And every time from that point forward that these neural connections in your brain fire fight or flight response in your body and nervous system, those neural connections get faster at firing fight or flight response, and they get stronger until eventually you don't have a neural pathway, you've got a neural highway of threat association, which means your brain perceives a lot of threat around that sensory data. And it a lot of times gets to the point where it's so distressing to be around that sensory data, whether it's driving or social situations or you name it, that we start to avoid because we think, okay, it just makes logical sense, right? We use deductive reasoning. Hey, every time that I get around this sensory environment, I feel super stressed. Maybe you start having panic attacks, or you start to become overwhelmed and derealization happens, or maybe time feels distorted, memory starts getting thrown off, and all kinds of other trauma symptoms. Even trauma is a state of nervous system overwhelm. So you're like, I want to feel better, so I should just avoid this sensory environment. But the problem with avoidance is it may serve the short-term benefit of reducing how anxious that you are, but you kind of win the battle and lose the war. Because whenever you start to avoid situations, especially that are connected to a normal, healthy life, your nervous system in general is going to slowly start to be more and more sensitized and stressed out, because your brain's thinking like, wait a second, they're avoiding driving, they're avoiding going to the grocery store, they're avoiding social situations, they're avoiding driving over bridges, they're avoiding leaving the house. Even eventually it can get so bad in a very agoraphobic situation where you don't even want to go outside. And so your brain thinks, well, they're avoiding because they're in danger. Your brain, body, and nervous system are going to back you up. If you avoid something, your brain is going to trust you and is going to create that association of threat for sure, even just by purely avoidance, but especially if you've had painful experiences around that sensory data. I remember one time I was watching this show on TLC, or it was some show, I forget what it's called, but they had this guy that was terrified of El Caminos, the card. Look it up on YouTube. And this poor guy, they took advantage of his OCD for the sake of entertainment, and I detest that. It drives me nuts whenever this happens. And every time that they flashed a picture of an El Camino, he would have an absolute freak out. He would go into a panic attack and he would start doing this, okay? So that doesn't make sense to the average person, right? So an El Camino is just a very ugly car, but it doesn't create panic and extreme anxiety, and people don't start doing this whenever they get around it ever. So why does this guy do this? Well, in the show, they kind of told the story, which is he was sitting in a car one day with a friend, which I don't think this guy's a friend at all because he basically intentionally triggered this guy. But an El Camino drove by, and this friend said, hey, you better wash off that El Camino or something bad is going to happen. Okay? And so apparently this guy dealt with OCD, and maybe he washed his hands, maybe it was contamination OCD or whatever, but even just this motion of washing his hands, it's called a decontamination compulsion. But he kind of did that to kind of help calm himself down. And so whenever he felt a lot of emotional distress connected to this visual sensory data of an El Camino, bam, there was an association that was formed. And the way that he reacted to that was through avoidance, as well as, this obsessive behavior that was not powerful enough to really desensitize that trigger. So avoidance, and then a compulsive behavior that may mitigate, but are not ever going to extinguish that sensory trigger. So every subsequent time that he avoided El Caminos and then relied on this hand motion instead of doing things that directly desensitize it, he's just strengthening the threat association with El Caminos. And it sounds silly. And, initially, if people don't understand how this stuff works, they may laugh at that. But I feel absolutely terrible for this guy, because we think logically, oh, well, it's just an El Camino. But for him, there is now a conditioned association of threat because of that painful experience from what his friend said. So now getting away from the El Camino is going to allow him to avoid something bad happening, whatever that is. It's very subjective. And so if I were working with that gentleman, I would have him intentionally expose himself to being around an El Camino, maybe start with a picture, because that's opposite of threat. Whenever you intentionally expose yourself to something, your brain thinks, oh, this can't be dangerous, because if it were dangerous, the last thing that you would be doing is going out of your way to be around it. So this is a counter response to threat. And then I would also have him continually calm his body, because body relaxation is also a counter response than threat. And so repeatedly doing exposure coupled with relaxation is one of the ways that you can start to desensitize sensory triggers. And eventually it would be extinguished, because now you've got this new history in your brain. Because of neuroplasticity, your brain's going to start reprogramming. Wait a second. There was extreme avoidance, or maybe doing some sort of compulsive behaviors, or just all these things that weren't really that effective. Now, intentional exposure is there, plus body relaxation. And this is so contrary to threat. Let's go ahead and start changing the association from one of threat to one of safety, okay? So anyway, this is something that I had to do. I had all kinds of things in my life that I was avoiding, and I started to replace that with exposure coupled with relaxation. Very, very, very powerful. The second thing, I stopped neglecting sleep. So let me tell you a story. I remember I worked at a call center. I talked about a story earlier where I was afraid of being fired, and then one day I showed up and I got the VIP award. Well, I remember I never got 8 hours to 9 hours of sleep. It was always about 7. And that's because I wasn't disciplined with sleep, and I always would basically go to sleep like just enough time to, get about 7 per day. I was like, oh, well, I can make it off of 7 hours, so that's fine. I was more focused on functioning than thriving. And I remember, it was a customer service job, and I remember I was in the Walmart program, so I'd be like, thank you for calling Walmart Protection Plans. My name is Jordan. May I please have your phone number with the area code first? I said that so many thousands of times that I still remember it. But the customers really just stressed me out, and it was just back-to-back calls sometimes for hours on end, so they should have added space between calls, technically. But regardless, there was no danger, but I was extremely stressed at that job. And I remember one day, I can't remember why, I was just so tired that I decided to go to bed like a couple hours earlier than I normally do. And so I got like 9 hours of sleep. And I remember I went to work the next day, and I remember there was just kind of like a pep in my step. And my managers didn't bother me so much. Well, I had one manager that I absolutely loved named Ben. He was just the best manager ever. But, the other supervisors and managers that I normally just didn't care for, it was like, hey, maybe they're not that bad. And the customers, I was almost like, thank you for calling Walmart Product Care Plan or whatever. My name is Jordan. It was like, I felt great. And I remember it was so noticeable that I took note of it. And I was like kind of wondering, like, what's different about today than other days? And I remember it finally hit me that I had gotten more sleep, and I made that connection. And you know what I responded with? For the rest of my life from that point forward, I started to prioritize sleep. It's not true. No, I would love to tell you that that was the case, but I didn't continue to prioritize sleep, even though I was able to see that direct effect on getting enough sleep. And so I continued to suffer with extreme anxiety. But nonetheless, years and years and years later, whenever I finally recovered, especially as I've studied, sleep scientists like Matthew Walker, he wrote a book called Why We Sleep, great book. He was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he's done a lot of podcasts. But I started to study sleep science, and I have discovered that there are a lot of studies that show that the less sleep that you get, the more activated the amygdala becomes in your brain. That's the part of the brain that alerts the sympathetic nervous system to prepare the body for fight or flight response. And so we need sleep. Okay. I know you're hearing this, and complexity bias is going to tell you, Jordan, there's no way that I would be able to help my anxiety with something as simple as sleep. But I'm telling you, some people just adding an hour or two of sleep per night can reduce your anxiety by 30 to 40%. And you also might consider having a sleep study done if you have extreme sleep issues, because you might have sleep apnea. And, I just spoke with somebody that once they got that diagnosis and they got on a CPAP machine, their anxiety drastically decreased just from that. So that's something to consider too. But nonetheless, what I tell people is once your sleep goes, everything goes. Like, you can be great at all these other things that I'm about to talk about and be doing so many healthy activities in life, but if you are not prioritizing sleep, none of that is going to be that effective. Sleep is a basic biological need. It is the ultimate self-regulation tool that if you don't prioritize this, everything else that you're doing in terms of self-regulation and self-care is going to be significantly more difficult and significantly less effective. So prioritize sleep. Okay. And, when I work with clients, I've got it's called Sleep School, and I've got 2 different trainings that go into a lot of strategies for sleep, but I'll just give you 2 of the biggest tips. Consistency is very important. So we have this thing called our circadian rhythm, which is our inner biological clock that determines when we get hungry and whenever we get a cortisol boost in the morning to wake up, when we get a melatonin boost to go to sleep. And one reason that you have so much trouble sleeping is because you're so inconsistent with your sleep that you're not getting a consistent melatonin boost to help you fall asleep. My melatonin as of right now hits me at about 11:15 p.m., like on the dot. And once that melatonin kicks in, I'm asleep within 5 minutes. But that's because I'm extremely consistent with my sleep when I wake up, whenever I go to sleep. The second thing is you want to make your room very cold and very dark, right? So I actually just watched a video on this. I haven't looked at the research behind it. So, obviously look this up, but there was this lady that was talking about even small amounts of light. And I think she said there was a study done on this, but even tiny amounts of light, like even just the little light on your smoke detector or something like that, can disrupt your circadian rhythm whenever you're trying to sleep, because light and heat is what resets our circadian rhythm. And so whenever your brain is seeing light, it thinks that it's the rays of sunshine slowly starting to go through as the sun is rising in the morning, and it can confuse your circadian rhythm. It can give you a cortisol boost, which is going to increase muscle tension and compromise your ability to sleep. So you want to make it as dark as possible, which I don't think I have it sitting here, but I've actually been using I don't know where it's at, but anyway, I actually have been using a sleep mask. And it's been really, really, really helpful for me just to block out all the light in my room. But then also make it as cold as possible. So our core body temperature has to drop, I think, between 1 and 2 degrees Fahrenheit to go to sleep. And so make sure that, you set the thermostat to where it's between 66 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you're on Celsius, you'll have to do the conversion. But another tip is, sleep with like one leg out of the covers. That can help lower your core body temperature. Also, if you get a rag, and like a wet rag, and put some ice in it, like in a little bowl, sometimes dabbing that on your neck as well as your feet can really help to start lowering your core body temperature. But anyway, there's tons of other tips that I could get, but I'm trying to get through these. So I could talk to you for hours about sleep. Number 3, I stopped tensing my body so much and started doing relaxation. So whenever your brain perceives threat, going back to the sensory triggers, whenever you see, hear, smell, taste, touch, feel something that is similar to a painful past experience, especially if there's a long history of painful past experiences, your body is going to start to tighten up, right? That's part of your body going into fight or flight response. And you need to start feeling that throughout the day, and then starting to relax it, Okay. So one technique that you can do that I teach my clients is a limp noodle. You literally just let a wave of relaxation go to the top of your head to the bottom of your feet. And every time that you take your muscles from a place of constriction to relaxation, you're activating your parasympathetic nervous system. So that's going to start to calm down sympathetic nervous system activation, which is part of the fight or flight response. And it also communicates safety to your nervous system. And so if you're in the presence of the trigger and you're calming your body, that is going to help show your nervous system that that sensory data is safe instead of dangerous. And so I also do progressive muscle relaxation. I kind of feel tension. I squeeze it slowly and then I release it. That's another technique that I do. Also, I have this Theragun here, one of the best investments that you can make. And I use this several times a day, usually about 2 to 3. To help keep tension out. 4-7-8 breathing is really effective. But anyway, start to feel tightness, right? Because you're up here, you're in your head all the time, and you don't even realize necessarily how much tension is happening in the body, or maybe you do, but a lot of people don't, and start to relax your body. The next thing is I stopped breathing through my chest, and I started to breathe through my diaphragm. So whenever you breathe, you want to let your whole core go out on the inhale. Belly and chest go out. And then you're going to let your belly and chest go down on the exhale through your mouth. About 7 seconds is good. The reason why we want to extend the exhale is because whenever we inhale, it activates our sympathetic nervous system. Whenever we exhale, it activates our parasympathetic nervous system. Like parachute. Think it's going to slow down stress, slow down sympathetic nervous system activation. But anyway, whenever you chest breathe, like your thoracic cavity is not capable of really holding enough oxygen for you to get a good breath. That's why you feel like, you're not getting enough breath whenever you breathe through your chest. So it would look like this. Your shoulders are usually going to go up like that. That's a chest breath. And you're going to feel shortness of breath. You're going to overbreathe, underbreathe. You may feel lightheaded. And we breathe thousands and thousands of times a day. And it's very, very important that you retrain your body to breathe through your diaphragm. So if you go and look in a baby ward of a hospital or look at your animals, they're breathing through their belly. But what ends up happening is, bad posture. So if you kind of hunch over like this, especially, it puts more pressure on your abdominals and you're not able to really get a full diaphragmatic breath. But then also maybe you get an injury, you have to have a body wrap that definitely can, compress your ability to breathe out through your belly and chest. Another thing too is tummy tucking. So if you feel like you're, overweight, or maybe you are overweight and you just don't want your belly to poke out, you might tighten your belly. But the problem with that is it's making it to where your belly and chest can't fully expand to get a true diaphragmatic breath. Shoulders are still, whole core's coming out. So practice that about 5 or 10 minutes a day, and it can really, really start to reduce your anxiety. Because if you're chest breathing, you're not getting enough oxygen, and it's really, really going to stress you out. And again, if you're overbreathing, underbreathing, and you feel like you're not getting enough oxygen, that can stress you out. It's really, really not good. The next thing is I stopped neglecting my diet. So I want to be clear. I'm not saying that I eat perfectly, but I had no idea how much that food affects our nervous system until I started to experience something called reactive hypoglycemia a couple years ago. It's essentially where you take in too many carbohydrates, especially empty carbs. We're not talking about like complex carbs, we're talking about like simple carbs. And you're not eating a healthy balance of fats, proteins, and complex carbs with each meal. And what happens is your blood sugar spikes up really high and then it drops really low. And you might have heard this as like a sugar crash. And whenever your blood sugar drops super low, your body triggers an adrenaline response to help raise up your blood sugars. And that can translate into anxiety. And so you need to be eating healthy. Try to make your diet like 70% healthy. Okay. I'm not a nutritionist or anything like that. Hire one for sure. There's this guy named Dr. Justin with Justin Health on YouTube. He's a really great nutrition guy to follow. I consider him probably one of the world's best, in my opinion. But nonetheless, food is mood. Okay, you are what you eat. I did not understand this, and I have started to emphasize diet a lot more to my clients that I work with. Every meal should have a healthy balance of proteins, fats, and carbs. Okay, and just get away from processed food, delete your DoorDash, your Grubhub app. It's wasting your money and it's not giving your body the nutrients that it needs. It could be leading to reactive hypoglycemia, which, by the way, people think, oh, well, hypoglycemia. Well, I'm not hypoglycemic. I'm not diabetic. So it's reactive hypoglycemia, which means anybody can experience. It's a reaction to this sudden influx of carbohydrates without enough protein and fat in your meals. And so anyway, work on that, okay? Anyway, the next thing that I stopped doing is drinking coffee or energy drinks. Now, I actually have been able to go back to coffee. I don't know about you, but I look forward to my morning cup of coffee immediately, like the next day, immediately after I get done drinking my morning coffee. Like that is how much that I love my morning coffee. I usually will sit outside, I'll do some reading. It's a very, very spiritual moment for me in the morning. And we've experimented with all kinds of coffee. I really love McDonald's Blueberry the best, but my wife's been getting some like s'mores coffee. It's really, really good. But anyway, caffeine is a sympathetic nervous system stimulant. And that is, if you're dealing with anxiety, that is the last thing that you want to do right now. So no Monster Energy, no Red Bull. If you just have to have some coffee, do half calf. They sell it at the store, at least here in the United States. It has like half the caffeine of a normal cup of coffee, or just completely don't do it. And you might get some withdrawals if you're like extremely addicted to caffeine. But I'll tell you, it's the last thing that you want to be doing right now. The next thing is I stopped assuming the worst and assumed the best, or or that something good can come from the worst case scenario. Okay. So part of anxiety is your brain goes into what's called catastrophic risk assessment. And so it's going to be feeding you with all kinds of catastrophic scenarios. And what we typically do is our brain gives us that catastrophic scenario and our muscles tighten up and we just flow with it. And we just start, visualizing it and we start preparing. Okay, well, if that's going to happen, I got to make sure that I'm prepared for it. So I want to be able to think of every single scenario that would help me navigate that situation. But by visualizing that in a tense body, you're keeping yourself really, really stressed out. So the first thing you want to do is start calming your body, because that's going to help restore access to your thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex, logical, critical, creative, and contextual thinking. But after you relax your body, I want you to change what you're visualizing. Visualize the positive outcome, because even though it's not real, it's still sensory data. I mean, look at the effects of your nervous system from visualizing the negative scenario. It's stressing you out. So why would visualizing the positive scenario not calm you down? It will, especially if you directly calm the body too. So you relax your body and then you start visualizing a positive and opposite scenario. And another thing that's really powerful is you can start asking a different question. So you can start asking a positive what if question. So if your brain's like, oh God, well, what if I pass out? Or what if, I get sick? Or what if this negative thing happens? Ask an opposite question than that. What if that doesn't happen? And what if this positive thing happens? And then start to visualize that. And then the last part of this is, even if the bad thing happens, I want you to focus on something good that can come from it. I actually got it tattooed on my wrist, and it was the stupidest thing that I've ever done in terms of placement. It looks totally dumb. I'm about to probably get another hand tattoo, and they can black that out as part of it. Probably going to get like a rose or something. But anyway, I got this word good because of former Navy SEAL Jocko Willink. There's a video on YouTube called, type in Jocko Willink and then the word good. Powerful video. But whenever something bad happens, you say the word good and you focus on a positive that can come from it. Even if it's just building resilience, it's still a positive. And sometimes things are so bad that that's all you're going to be able to say is a good outcome is that at least it built resilience. But by connecting that bad outcome to at least one positive thing, it's immediately going to start to desensitize it. But if you have this terrible catastrophic outcome and that is the only association with it, it's going to be extremely, extremely stressful for you. So this is something that I do is I'll say, okay, good. You're not saying that the bad thing is good, but you're saying good in the sense of, okay, yeah, that bad thing is going to happen, but it's going to teach me patience. It's going to make me more resilient. I learned what not to do. That's a good one that I figure that I can use sometimes with this. But anyway, so that is it. Those are the 7 things. If that has helped you, make sure to click the like button. We'd love to have you join this family. So click that subscribe button, comment below, and ask any questions, and I'd love to answer them for you. That is it, and I hope you have an awesome day.